makes it up and the points don't matter. Why units matter? So we've talked about the need to communicate back and forth reliably, and so we actually know what's going on, but then our units of measurement matter as well. So we have things like length, duration, area, volume, and the list just goes on, which is why the OMI is there. As far as how that translates into us as iOS, macOS, watchOS, visionOS, tvOS developers, or Swift on the server if you do that, well, we've got types such as unit, which is a fairly base measurement that just has a symbol as a part of it. And then you've got dimension in there. A dimension actually describes the unit itself and the symbol, but also a conversion. So if we take one of these provided unit types, such as length or something like that, it'll have a base unit associated with it that allows you to do conversion from one length to another. It's all pretty cool. It all makes a lot of sense and allows us to take something that is stored in, say, meters and show it to a user with miles or something else based on their locale or anything like that. If we want to get into creating some custom units, we can do that as well. Custom dimensions, we can do that as well. Here's an example where a type is created with two different actual units in there, being what did we have? I just copied that out of Apple's docs actually. So radioactivity, becquerel and curie, and you also have a base unit there. The base unit's there so you know how to do the conversions, and you've also got the unit conversion there. In this case it's linear, meaning you take whatever's the base unit and then you do a multiplication in order to get it to this other value. Cool. Converting from one measurement to another, the measurement will have a converted function on it, and you just go, okay, this you got measurement, you call converted, and then you provide a different unit as the argument there. It needs, so if you've got a length, it will need to be a length as well, because the measurement is a generic type, and those types such as length need to match when using this function. Okay, a bit of trivia for everyone. What does this number mean? Anyone want to guess? Someone guess circumference of the Earth? Centimetres in a mile?
Seconds in a year?
Yes, seconds in a year. So what I mean by this is if you've just got a plain value there and you look at it, you've got it stored in a database or something, you've really got no idea what that value is or why it's used, how you can use it or anything like that. So when keeping track of the data, you need to follow this rule of always store the unit. That is, if you have a value stored in seconds, you want to be storing or having a strong association that it is in fact seconds, which is pretty cool. Okay, on to measurement as a type. As I said before, this is generic. It is there for just sort of making sure that measurements of the same type, such as length or duration or volume or area or anything like that, actually makes a bit of sense. What can you do with a measurement? You've got a value there. That value is a double. That's your raw number. You've got the unit, which is a unit type, the generic part of it. You've also can do things like conversion. So converted to will produce you a new variable to use. Convert to will be there for changing the measurement in place. You can do arithmetic, so things like addition, subtraction, multiplication are possible on measurement. You can do comparison, so is this value in metres equal to this value in miles? You can do that, it works. You can also format them, so you can sort of take the raw value, append the unit string onto it, and that unit string will allow you to have things as like meters or seconds or whatever's there in the user's locale as the appropriate identifier for the metric. And you can also do ranges, so say 5 metres to 10 metres, that all makes sense. You can do say 5 metres to 2 miles. You probably wouldn't want to, but you can do stuff like that as well. Now on to the fun stuff, which is displaying all of this in an app. In the old days, you'd need to do stuff like this. Who remembers this fun little command called sprintf? Obviously Bok, yes. Anyone else? Yep, Tubbs. You're younger than me. Okay, so sprintf is for taking a C-based string and then formatting it in any particular way you want. So part of the string could be like a decimal or anything like that, and you provide the decimal as an argument, and then it gets substituted into the string and everything magically works. Objective-C.io had in issue 9 about strings a lot of the string formatting rules and guides and tips. So if you're still based in UIKit or AppKit and you need to work with strings and do say string with format, you can refer to that, or the Apple developer guides as well. But for a lot of apps, they've started to make use of SwiftUI, and here measurements and also formatters make a lot more sense. A formatter will handle the conversion from our unit or our measurement and provide a displayable string as the result. So some documentation here, again, Apple's docs. I will put these slides up on Slack later tonight, just so anyone can take a look and grab all of these links out. But these are just straight from the documentation in Xcode or Apple's website. Formatter is the base type, and then you've got stuff like a measurement formatter, which is specific to measurements. And in SwiftUI, to display a string, you'll typically use the text view, which can take your string, or sorry, doesn't have to be a string, it can be anything that your formatter understands, so a measurement or a number if you're using a number formatter, and have them all in there, so you provide your value and then the correct formatter, and away it goes. What does that formatter look like? Looks a bit like this. This is very simplified for actually dealing with the slides. So here where you're calling string 4 on any type, you then go through the process of manually changing your type. So you'll do things like casting it to whatever you want, making sure there are guards and all that in place, and then returning the appropriate string. Here it's just foobar buzz, fairly standard, fairly common developer lingo just for a random string, 3 things in there. Again, how does this look with the input? So here you would have the text input. You've got your variable being changed. In this case, it is a string. Doesn't have to be. It can be like a decimal, it can be a number, it can be whatever you want. That's set as the value binding, and you then provide the formatter. So the formatter is that one, and here you provide it, so it will take the input string, do any transformations on it, and produce our output, which here is foobar buzz. Okay, one of the good advantages here is no more delegates, so you don't have to worry about creating a UI text field, setting a delegate, and particularly this awful thing you no longer need to worry about. It's not deprecated, but in Swift UI you just don't need to worry about it. A benefit of doing that is you end up with having strong types all the way down. So your input can be a double, or it can be whatever you want or whatever you need, and it appropriately gets transformed for display and stuff like that. While it is types all the way down, one thing to remember is not all types are equal. And for me, doing a cycling or a health-based app in my spare time, I have to deal a lot with HealthKit. So for HealthKit, it has its own idea of units and measurements, and these are incompatible with those in Foundation. So here, stuff like HK unit, quantity type, all of that are just not compatible with the ones in Foundation. So you need to do manual conversion between the two, which is painful and horrible because you might be dealing with some location data and then need to create samples out of that location data so you can then store it in HealthKit. Painful because you have to do manual conversion. Yeah, it's annoying, but that's reality until Apple decides, oh, we'll just get rid of one of these and have it all as a standard. But we know what happens to standard, so okay, cool. Recap. We know measurements, they've been around for a very, very, very long time. They're something that you just have as part of everyday life, which is pretty cool. They allow us to talk together and understand each other and just sort of work back and forth and stuff like that. We've then got the types as defined in Foundation Framework and in Swift, and NS Foundation in Objective-C. So stuff like unit and dimension are also equivalent to NS unit, NS dimension in Objective-C. So you still have access to all of that base stuff. In Swift UI, everything needs to be Swift, which is pretty cool. And you can do formatters in there as well, just as part of the UI. So yeah, all of this is pretty cool. That's it for my talk. If anyone has any questions. Okay. Tubbs?
Is it possible to enumerate what the actual units available in the system are? So say, for example, you've got your cycling data and you've got all the different lengths, and Apple adds nautical miles and you want to show cycling data in nautical miles for some reason. Is there, are you able to just that just becomes an option in your app, or do you actually have to programmatically go and say, "Oh no, I want to offer kilometres, miles, nautical miles"?
Okay, so I think there are two sides to that question. One side of it is if someone has set their system locale and device up so that for measurements everything is displayed in nautical miles, then as long as you've got the units with an appropriate unit length, it will then propagate through, be picked up by the formatter and shown as nautical miles in your app. You've also then got, okay, what if you want to store it in nautical miles or something like that? You either have to worry about sort of your JSON decoding or something like that in order to throw it all into where you're storing it, or you need to have some association between a value and your unit being nautical miles. Hopefully that answers the question. If it's just for display, magic works and you're good. If it's for storage, you need to be a bit more careful and tricky with it. Any more questions?
I think we're good.
Okay, thank you.
That's the wrong one. That one. There we go. I can hide away in the corner. Perfect. Okie dokie. So I'm Sky. I'm a consultant. Not much else to say there. So let's move on. I've had a few very interesting conversations with a lot of people far smarter and far more experienced than me over the last couple of months, and I thought I'd share a couple of the things we've discussed, mostly relating to app architecture and maintainability, and making sure that the code bases we build are accessible to people of all skill levels. Sky, could you step up to the podium?
Ah,
so we can-
There we go. Everything that is even remotely intelligent or sensible, full credit goes to all the wonderful people who I've been speaking to, if you're in this room. Everything that's just nonsense, blame me. So the good news is that I'm not going to stand up here and tell you all about the favorite architecture of the week I've come up with. We're not going to try to work out whatever that is. This is a more high-level topic. Those who know me know that I'm a bit of a head in the clouds, California dreaming. It's about the design, it's about the experience. So, I am uniquely unqualified to talk about the technical nuances of architecture, but design is still very important. Now, not so much in terms of UX design, but in terms of software design. Not what we build, but how we build it. Because if you're in it for the tech or you're in it for the experiences, ultimately, good design enables us to create what we want, to deliver the products that we want. I've faced a few challenges in building accessible architectures, and I've come up with this little idea I'd like to throw around, see what people think of it. A 5-minute architecture. Now, the conundrum I've come across as a consultant is that I work on a lot of very interesting code bases for sometimes small to mid-sized companies that don't have all the money in the world to throw around. There's a pretty standard cost to what it takes to build an iOS app, but lots of small businesses, they'd rather go to freelancers, they'd rather go to graduates, university students to try to have them build out these apps. In a lot of cases, that doesn't usually go so well.
But nonetheless, they might end up coming to me to, well, there's this old saying, there's always someone willing to do it cheaper and a person willing to do it cheaper. Nonetheless, even if I do a bunch of project work, I'd eventually like to be able to hand the code base off to someone trying to get into the industry to maintain it. Usually, companies don't need major changes or features built out. It's just taking care of things, fixing the occasional bug, working on the UI. And I'm sure we'll get plenty of messages on LinkedIn from people who have finished their 100 days of Swift and they're trying to find somewhere to something to do. So I like to build out code bases that are accessible to them. So how I solve this, basic level, and this is only applicable to me, I would not recommend it. But when I'm building out code bases, usually greenfields, sometimes when I'm overhauling existing ones, I try to stick to what I think everyone coming into the industry now is going to be familiar with. So Swift and SwiftUI wherever possible. I try to keep everything isolated, because the last thing someone who's just wrapping their head around the idea of, classes versus class instances, they don't want to have to worry about all of these pipelines connecting classes in some complex way. I try to clearly define everything in the app, where it's getting data from, and where it needs to give data to, and what's going to cause state changes in the app, like navigation. When I'm trying to describe the architecture of the app, I don't want to give them any major lessons. So I want to try to stick with what most people will already know, regardless of their experience level. Again, my threshold is if they've done their 100 days of SwiftUI, they should be able to jump onto the code base, pick things up as they go, but still feel comfortable. Rather than writing comprehensive documentation, what I've settled on is the root folder of the app. Just have a little README that points to a 5-minute YouTube video where I just explain in abstract the overall architecture and something nuanced details. So if they're using the app on their phone, if they're trying to work out where they need to change things, they should have an idea at very least what files they need to open up, what they're going to be dealing with. What about big business? Now, I was surprised because working as a consultant, I'm usually on my lonesome, but a lot of people have shared that they face a similar situation in larger companies. In lots of cases, they've got such large teams that they really can't focus on teaching everyone, bringing them up to scratch on a specific architecture. They try to keep things pretty simple and pretty generic. Now, that's, the word simple is doing a lot of heavy lifting there, because a good architecture at scale, it'll still be easily accessible, but nonetheless, it will hold up to the weight of massive code bases if they're scaling vertically or horizontally. Building something that's accessible and approachable that doesn't crush under its own weight is really tricky. And absolute, fantastic every company that manages this, because a lot of them don't really. Keeping things modular, well documented, trying to replace the old code as it starts to age out. Being able to bring your interns in, and regardless of how much experience they have, then being able to sit down and feel pretty comfortable with the app as it is, comfortable to make changes. Because I think regardless of what they're doing, if they feel like they're just in this little corner dealing with a small part of the app, and they don't really understand the big picture, that's going to impede their learning. That's going to impede how fast they can pick up on things. But if they're, at the peak of the Dunning-Kruger effect and they really think they've got a good grasp on things, they're going to be more confident jumping in and picking stuff up. It's worth noting there are plenty of companies that are lucky enough to have small, nimble, passionate teams that really do have rigorous architectural practices, and it's just expected that people pick them up as they go. But that's not always the case. And a pattern I've seen quite a lot, I like to describe it on this little graph. Okay, so you've got beginner friendliness on the vertical axis. The stuff up top, that's what you put the interns on. The further down you go, mid-level, senior, and eventually the guy in the basement who wrote the app in 2008 or whatever. Usually you just got code age. It's not always indicative. It's not always about age, but that's usually a pretty good idea. So we usually start off, if you look at more recent stuff in the last couple of years, especially in the last year or so where SwiftUI started to mature, you'll see parts of the app being built in SwiftUI. And a shocking number of people joining the industry, that's all they know. And I fear, fear's the wrong word. I'm enthusiastic, but SwiftUI is creeping up on us a lot faster than I anticipated. It's maturing, people are adopting it, and it's getting to the point where I thought UIKit's going to be around for a fair while, but we're now almost, maybe this year's interns, maybe next year's interns, they'll learn SwiftUI, and there'll be enough work for them there that they never have to learn UIKit. And I'd say that'd be quite an achievement. In a lot of the industry, even if people have started learning in the last few years, they still have to go back and learn Objective-C. I think we can avoid that with UIKit. I think we can get people on SwiftUI, always on SwiftUI. Nonetheless, as the code base starts to age out, we might see some of the older SwiftUI with its, self. We'll get a bit of programmatic UI kits, some zibs, some storyboards, and the Objective-C, which is hanging around, but it's been taken care of. This is just generic. I'm not saying this is the average company in Australia, but there are a handful, and they know who they are. The further back you go, eventually you get into what I call the crusty zone. This is the stuff that has just been there for yonks. Usually the point where even team leads mightn't be particularly familiar or comfortable working with it. Even if they originally wrote it, it's been so long since they were working with it that, they'd rather just not touch it. If code has managed to age this long without being touched, usually what I find is that it's a lot of really early iOS stuff, lots of deprecated libraries. You might even see some ported C++ in there. You'll see libraries that have just kind of become part of the furniture. No one really uses or knows what they do, but it's too much effort to take them all out, and it's not hurting anyone. Lots of Objective-C. And what I've found is that if this code sticks around for long enough, it's usually part of core app functionality. It's usually data storage. You'll see networking in there, and you'll see navigation. And when you bring in new teammates, they might go months or even years before they pick up enough experience and before they become familiar enough to really understand the big picture of how the app works, which is in stark contrast to what I'd like, which is to be able to bring in someone new, give them an overview, and have them confident that they know roughly where to look in about 5 minutes. Now, this might seem pretty basic, I'm just saying don't write spaghetti, but the problem is it's not so much that this is spaghetti. This could have been best practice at some point. This could have been some really good code. It could have been pretty standard, and it just kind of got left behind. An argument I've heard in a lot of businesses is that, it's working fine, it does what we want, and it's reliable, it's battle tested. This code has been around for half a decade, even longer. Just don't touch it. Going in and rewriting this would be wasteful. It's fine, we can still read and write Objective-C. Well, that's kind of waning, but it's so fine. We can all still read and write UIKit, and I'm sure we will for another couple of years. But if you let this stuff age out, if you're not proactively digging into it, everything becomes crusty in the end. At a certain point, no matter how comfortable we are, we're all going to move on to different libraries, different paradigms, different programming styles. And we're not going to go back and touch the old stuff. So, first hot take of the evening, the best time to migrate your Objective-C to Swift was back when everyone was still comfortable writing Objective-C. And I've seen a pretty consistent pattern with a lot of the code bases I've worked on. You'll see all of the Objective-C code bases that got migrated to Swift or just a total rewrite, and those companies are doing fine, and maybe they've been re-architecting the software time and time again since then. You've got the companies that said, well, the Objective-C works and we're comfortable with it, it's not a big problem. And then history kind of moved on without them. And sometimes they've changed developers, and they're in a position where they really don't have that skill set to go back and do anything anymore. They just kind of get stuck in time. So Objective-C, what's done is done. Everyone's pretty much where they are. I don't think much is going to change. But it's important to look at what we're doing right now, all of the things we're comfortable with today, and consider what's kind of just sitting there in the corner of our code bases that we're not really touching, not really thinking about, that's fine where it is, but after a while is really going to start to become a maintenance nightmare. So, second hot take, the best time to migrate our UIKit to SwiftUI is while we're all still comfortable with UIKit. Now, I'm using some pretty generic examples with Obc and Swift and UIKit and SwiftUI here, but it's worth considering what other things in our apps are risk going stagnant. Things like libraries, the marketing team really insisted we absolutely need all of these metrics. We need this built into the app that seems to just get through the entire code base, then got moved on from, but, it's no big deal. Leave it there, it's not hurting anyone. Or in other cases, maybe it's a paradigm that our team lead was really enthusiastic about, then that team lead moves on, and the rest of the team doesn't really care so much about that anymore. Is there any housework we need to do while we're still relatively familiar with what's going on? What sort of code would we be telling our interns, no, don't worry about that, that's fine. Yeah, just leave it. That's the stuff we need to be focusing on. It's the stuff that doesn't look like it's hurting anyone, but a few years down the line is really going to start being a problem. So a lot of faster companies with lots of iteration, they ship Theseus their code base out quite a lot. Nothing seems to get that old. Slower teams that perhaps have less changes aren't changing things out as much, but that just means the code becomes slower and slower to change when they need to, so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Leaving things better off than you found them, it's a principle I hear a lot of companies talk about, but it's not going to help you if you're not going into those corners of your app, making some changes and going away from them. So really, we don't want this. What we'd like is a relatively short, nice green bar at the top. So when we bring people in, they're happy to just tackle everything. So it's worth thinking, how possible is it to shorten that down? How possible is it to maintain this? Because regardless of what practices we're doing now, that's all going to start aging out over time, and eventually we might want to start fading things out as we go. That's basically it. No grand lessons, nothing really, no mission statement, but I just really think there are so many people trying to break into this industry, and it's heartbreaking getting messages from people who are absolutely ready and willing to just dive into a code base, but knowing we only have so much that they'd be able to work on, so it's not cost effective to hire you today. I really think there is a lot of room for improvement in lots of companies in lots of different ways. And this is CocoaHeads, so this is the most passionate of the industry. But nonetheless, just as a thought experiment, what sort of stuff in your code base is starting to age out without anyone really paying much attention to it? And how easy will it be to come back to that a couple of years down the line if it starts being a problem? Or for the next person, for our successors who are joining the industry today, will they have a clue what the code's on about? Anyway, that's basically it. That's a wrap. So.
Any questions?
If I've said anything that's complete nonsense, feel free to call me out on it.
I liked it. It's got to be self-reflective. Feeling guilty. Oh, sorry. It's making me feel guilty for the bad code I left behind.
Someone else's problem now, I know.
Anyone got any questions? Questions?
I don't have a question. I actually do have a comment. I totally agree 100%. That was really good. But also from the point of view of you as an individual in your career, don't get left behind in the crush.
Oh, absolutely.
Your career will also have to move on and adapt to these new things and move with it. And if you feel that you're getting left behind, have a think about that from the point of view of where you're going to be in 5 years, 10 years.
Absolutely.
Or just from a company point of view.
Anyone else?
Hey, Sky. Look, it was a really good talk. How did you sort of settle on the idea of doing a YouTube video helping people understand? I think it's a good idea, so I'll probably end up stealing it, but yeah.
Oh, please do. The YouTube video was interesting because I want something that years from now, it's something I can trust will still be there. But a lot of the code bases I've worked on, the previous developers, they've written lots and lots of big README files. And what I saw happening a lot, they wouldn't really describe the app architecture. It'd just be, here's 500 lines of all the things they never got around to doing. So first, and I'm trying to understand this code base, I'm like, this is pretty useless for me. I'd rather have an understanding of what the code base is doing. So write README files that describe how it all works rather than stuff that hasn't been done yet. That's what Jira is for. But I noticed that these were getting relatively long, and sometimes it's easier just to draw something on a whiteboard. If you've got a simple enough architecture, should be able to draw it in 2D space. And just once I tried the idea, I was like, I just thought I'll just explain the architecture in a video. It ended up being 45 minutes long. And I just said, nope, okay, mission failed. Let's try this again. And I constrained myself. I said, if I can explain, no one doesn't watch that video. They might watch a 5-minute video. And I started trying to explain it, but I just couldn't boil it down to that point where it's simple enough. And that's when I realized this architecture is not beginner friendly. Not only do I need to be able to explain it quickly, but it needs to be something that is explainable quickly. So the 5-minute YouTube video, I've had had a few people reach out to me since, they took on some code bases and they were pretty happy with it. And I thought, it's not a substitute for for proper documentation, but it's just a nice little crash course. No one wants to read through all of your docs. If they can just sit down for 5 minutes, browse TikTok or whatever, yeah, okay, fair enough, and then jump in, it's just enough for this modern attention span. But it was just an experiment, and I think it works relatively well, and it keeps me accountable, forcing me to keep everything simple and to explain it well.
I've got one.
Yep.
How do you tell when code should be left behind?
Well, that's it's a heartbreaking conversation when I have to tell one of my clients, look, this is how much it would cost me to rewrite everything from scratch. This is how much it costs to maintain. I think in some circumstances, in both cases, you're either leaving something in the past entirely. In other cases, you're just saying, I just need to bolt stuff onto your code base without going back and modifying it, because that's just going to be financially ruinous to you. And, occasionally I will be, time deadlines and a company that might have run out of runway but still needs the app shipped. Sometimes you'll just bring over some Objective-C and say, this sits here for a while, I feel disgusting, but we are leaving this code in the past, and it's just going to keep running for the next 3 years in the app. How do you, leaving it behind? There's leaving it be, and then there is cutting it off. And those are two different things. But
so put a warning sign up for the next person, maybe.
Absolutely. Like I'll always abstract it first. If I'm using disgusting code, I'll just throw a Swift abstraction on, and I'm like, okay, we're calling something in Swift, so no one needs to worry about Objc or imports. And then the Swift then calls my little interposer will call out the original Objective-C. And I'll just pack that file full of comments and warnings saying this needs to be re-implemented, but time constraints mean that's not happening. But here's a really nice Swift class, or here's a protocol that defines exactly what it needs to do. It's just I do not have time to re-implement this right now. The client is screaming at me, game over, sorry. I do envy these people with salaried careers where they can experiment and build. But unfortunately, I charge by the hour, so that's not always a luxury I have. It'd just be wrong for the client. So I'm in a unique position. I'm in a certain position that other people aren't. And it depends on what you're doing and what the constraints are. But when I'm dealing with the highest of constraints, trying to do everything to a price, I do a lot of things I am very ashamed of. It's just trying to do so in a way that's maintainable into the future. It isn't going to cause further problems when the company does get a few dollars in and can afford to polish things up a little.
Anyone else?
Go back one, actually. I'll just step back. Thank you very much to Sky and Amy for your excellent talks tonight. I hope everybody enjoyed those. Before we wrap up, a quick reminder that the next event is the Hack Night with the correct date now. Is that right, Tups? 21st? Yep. If not, Tups. That's what Meetup says, so that's probably right then. So yeah, Hack Night's on the 21st, 2 weeks from now. Normally it's next week, but this time because of the start of the month, it's a week after. Social night is on the last Tuesday of the month, 27th. A big thanks to our sponsors and speakers tonight, the Mentor Group for hosting us. Looking forward to 2024. Thanks again to Amy and Sky. And that's it. Quite a few people will head for a social time after this at the Mitre Tavern. If you're interested in joining, follow the crowd. They'll be heading in that direction. And thank you very much.